Well, as regular On the Money viewers know, what we do here on this programme is we stage in-depth conversations with people who really know their stuff. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Sir Steve Webb, who was Pensions Minister of State during David Cameron's coalition government. He is one of the principal architects of the triple lock. We've got Becky O'Connor, who's Head of Pensions and Savings for Interactive Investor. And in the studio, it's friend of the show, the Investment Trust Director and Money Week columnist Max King. Great to see you, Max. Steve Webb, let's start with you. I mean, you must be quite disappointed that Rishi Sunak didn't observe the triple lock. It's been observed every single year since you helped introduce it in 2010-11 in the coalition government. He says an 8.3% wage increase is a statistical anomaly. Isn't he right?
He is right, yes, and I think 8.3 is the wrong answer for this April. I would have been dismayed if they'd said they were scrapping the triple lock for good. I'd have been on the barricades with the pensioners if that's what they'd done. What I was relieved by is they said this is for 1 year only. So you've got this coming April. 8.3% isn't what people are getting in pay rises. People in work aren't getting 8%. So that's the wrong answer. But I also think 3.1% is the wrong answer because, as you just said, Liam, that's September's CPI inflation. By next April, the Bank of England thinks it'll be about 5%. So I think if they're going to link to inflation for 1 year only, it should be the best bet of what inflation next April is going to be, with pensioners spending a lot on fuel bills, council tax bills, food and so on. 5% or something like that would enable pension living standards to be maintained for this one very strange year off the back of COVID before reinstating the triple lock, which I think remains essential for the medium term.
Rebecca O'Connor of Interactive Investor, you're very much from the world of financial markets and private sector pensions, of course, a very important part of the pension provision across our country. But what do you make of this row? We've just heard there from Steve Webb, you know, the architect of the triple lock himself, saying maybe 8.3% would have been wrong, but above average, above inflation increase of 5%, given that inflation was at 3.1% in September, would have been fair. Does that sound right to you?
I think, over 8% was certainly an anomaly, and it was pandemic related. So on that basis, it does make sense to look at whether or not that was the right measure to use. As Steve says, though, it's whether or not the government reintroduces the triple lock at the end of the year, which is really we should be paying attention to, and we need to make sure we hold them to account on that. They've said they're going to reintroduce it. Whether they will or not, after having saved quite a lot of money, it has to be said, remains to be seen. So, yes, we needed to look at that anomaly, do something with it, but also, yes, we need to make sure that the benefits for pensioners in the future going forwards are maintained. Because, of course, the whole point is pensioners don't just have the ability to go out and earn more money through a job, the way that younger people in the working population do. That is their income. So in times of really high inflation, as we have now, it's very, very difficult for them to get by.
What do you make of this, Max? You watch government policy very closely. Baroness Ros Altman, she's a very serious person.
Well, so is Steve Webb. I mean, two of the best pension ministers we've ever had.
Absolutely. So where do you fall? They seem to be not arguing. They both want the triple lock, but Ros is insisting this 8.3% increase should be forthcoming in order to maintain the principle.
Well, I can see the reason for maintaining the principle, because if you suspend it once, you can suspend it again. Yeah. But I'd have thought the best solution would have been to say, rather than suspend the rule, use a 2-year average. So this year, take the average of the three take the 2-year average of each of the three calculations, see which was highest, deduct last year's, and give that. Yeah. I don't know what the number is, but it seems to be that would probably. It
would have been somewhere between 3.1 and 8.3, which is what Steve Webb wants.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I think that would have been a nice, elegant solution, which would have maintained the triple lock whilst not giving 8.3, but giving a reasonably generous increase.
Now, Steve, we're hoping to get Ros on the line. She's just trying to hitch up to our camera system on her computer. But while we've got you here, Steve, tell us about how the triple lock came about. You were literally in the room. You were a pensions minister under David Cameron's coalition government. You, of course, were a distinguished Lib Dem front bench spokesman. That's what the coalition was about. Did you imagine when you were formulating that policy that 10 years later it would be such a massive institutional part of our pension system?
To be honest, I didn't. I mean, I think that the history of it was that the 2.5% floor was to try and avoid the famous, notorious 75p that Gordon Brown once put on the pension. You know, so when inflation and wages are really, really low, pensioners can get pennies, and just politically that's very difficult. So the 2.5% floor was for that. Linked to prices, obviously, to stop pension living standards falling, and linked to earnings to make sure that people are keeping pace with the working pace population. One of the good things, really, is you leave government and you think, well, anything you actually did stand the test of time. Obviously, some other things, auto-enrolment and so on, did, but you wonder whether the other things will be reversed. But actually, what happened with the triple lock is in the 2015 election, every party was committed to it. You know, they could see that this wasn't just a 5-year fix, as you said. Mrs. Thatcher broke the earnings link for 30 years, started a 30-year process of squeeze on the pension, which wasn't going to be reversed in 5. So I think it's really important that this is for the medium term, maybe not forever, but for the medium term, till we get this basic pension up to a higher level. And Liam, if I can just add one thing on what I think Ros would be saying if she could connect with you, is she's not actually calling for this 8.3% as such. She's saying keep an earnings link, but let the statisticians come up with an earnings number that strips out, the COVID effect. So the earnings number might end up being 4 or 5. I think that's what Ros is calling for, rather than just the headline 8.
I think both of you in different ways are trying to preserve the principle of the triple lock, aren't you? So this 1-year anomaly, the Chancellor's word, doesn't blow the whole thing out the water. And in fairness to the Chancellor, he has said it is only for 1 year. Rebecca, let's come back to you for now. Tell us about the sort of provision of pensions across the piece, because despite auto-enrolment, another policy which Steve Webb was very heavily involved in introducing and promoting, pension provision in this country is pretty patchy, isn't it? A lot of people will end up relying on the basic state pension, and by international standards, despite 10 years of triple lock related rises, our basic state pension is relatively ungenerous.
Yeah, I mean, a huge number of people already depend on the state pension, and that isn't likely to change in the future. So what we've got happening is a switch over from defined benefit pension schemes, so relatively generous final salary schemes that pay people an income based on their final salary for the rest of their lives, over to defined contribution, which most younger workers are on now through auto-enrolment, where the minimum that you and your employer pays in is 8% of earnings. So whether or not that is going to be enough going forwards to supplement the state pension for people, particularly if that state pension is diminished through measures like adjusting the triple lock, if you put your private pension on top of your state pension, after 8% of contributions through a DC scheme over the years, will that be enough? And we don't necessarily think that it is, actually. We think that people may have to put in more than 8% to come out with a decent private pension through their workplace, saved up through working life, plus the state pension. So there is this dependence on the state pension. It's not going to go anywhere. Young people today who think that this debate about the triple lock is nothing to do with them, actually it is, because they are one day going to rely on that state pension too, or at least it will form a large part of their retirement income. Today's pensioners are a mixed bag. Obviously, you have some people who would be quite happy to do away with the state pension entitlement. They don't feel that they need it. But then at the other end of the spectrum, you have people who really need it, in particular women and people who earned a lower amount throughout their working lives. So absolutely, the picture is very mixed and depends on the type of scheme that you have or had, and the number of years that you were working for your state pension entitlement.
Max, as Rebecca says, it is quite patchy provision. We got the biggest, or one of the biggest, asset management businesses in the world in this country, a huge financial services sector. You used to be a leading figure in that industry of asset management. How have we ended up in a situation where our pension provision is as patchy as it is for so many ordinary people?
Well, we have to remember that actually a number of years ago, we introduced the auto-enrolment Turner pension. And that means that everyone has to invest or put money aside into a top-up private pension.
Which the state matches. Almost matches, yeah.
Which means that in time nobody will be dependent on the state pension because everybody will have a top-up. And that was a wonderful decision for the long term, and assuming that the government don't try and filch all the money and spend it on stupid projects, which they seem to be threatening to do on a regular basis, I think that's going to be a major successful innovation. The problem is that how much do you put into a pension? And the answer is quite simple. The amount you put in depends on the returns you get out of it. The lower the returns you seek, the more you have to put in. And the reason why some of the defined benefit pension schemes like University Superannuation Scheme are in such crisis is because they've decided in the future they're going to be able to only earn derisory returns. So they want more and more money to go into it. Now, 8% might be enough if you get the right returns. And if you invest for the long term, putting 8%, well, I would say it's a bit tight, but 8% with the benefit also of the top-up with the basic state pension, I thought that would be perfect enough. But you have to get the right returns out of your pensions, otherwise you're in trouble.
But a lot of pension managers are not forced, but certainly browbeaten by the regulators to put money into government bonds, which return derisory amounts of money, less than the rate of inflation.
Well, people are pretty negligent about what their pension funds are doing, and you want to check that if you're a member of a big pension scheme which is ploughing money into government bonds, move out and get your own pension, your own SIP, which is far more flexible. And thanks to the innovation, the pension freedoms which Steve Webb introduced, when was it, 7 or 8 years ago? I mean, the system massively there are massive advantages to doing that.